A millionaire dining at a fancy restaurant is unexpectedly called father by two ragged poor girls. It seemed like a simple misunderstanding until one girl produced an object that brought the wealthy man to his knees weeping. The sleek black Maybach pulled up in front of the Il Sogno restaurant. Its tires crunched over the thick snow covering the New York street. The driver hurried to open the door. Victor Hawthorne stepped out. He was wearing an expensive wool overcoat and adjusted his collar. Victor paid no mind to the cold biting at his skin. His mind was solely occupied with numbers. He had just signed a $2 billion contract for the construction of twin towers. To Victor, New York at that moment resembled a plastic architectural model. He was the one who controlled those blocks. The people walking on the street were merely nameless specks. Victor walked with a decisive stride. He desired a quiet dinner to conclude a victorious day. In the secluded corner next to the revolving door, Maya tightly held Lily's hand. Maya used her back to shield her sister from the sharp gusts of wind. Maya's eyes were sunken from lack of sleep. This 12-year-old had learned to stand firm against any storm. Lily shivered in her thin, worn-out coat. Her face was pale blue. Lily peered into the brightly lit glass windows of the restaurant. Maya, my stomach hurts so much. Hold on a little longer, Lily. I'll find a way. Mom said Dad would pick us up at beautiful places like this, didn't she? That's right. Dad is building a castle for us. You have to be a good girl. Marco stepped out from behind the glass door. The manager's suit was immaculate. Marco spotted two unkempt figures in the corner of the entrance. He approached them with an annoyed expression. Maya looked up. She hoped to see a shred of kindness. Sir, my sister is very hungry. Does the restaurant have any leftover bread? Marco frowned. He stood directly in front of the two children to shield them from the customer's view. Go somewhere else immediately. Il Sogno is no place for vagrant children. Please, sir, just a small piece for my sister. I said get lost. Don't dirty my establishment's lobby. The police will be called if you stand here any longer. Marco shoved Maya backward. Maya bit her lip. She didn't cry. She took her sister's hand, intending to leave. Lily remained motionless. She didn't hear Marco's harsh dismissal. Lily was staring toward the Maybach. The door of Il Sogno opened. A blast of warm air from the heaters rushed out. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with the aroma of premium wine enveloped the space. Victor Hawthorne walked forward. He did not look at Marco. He also did not notice the two children huddled in the corner. Victor bypassed them as though they were broken, discarded items on the sidewalk. His gaze was steely. He simply wanted to quickly get to his table. Victor walked past Lily. The hem of his overcoat brushed against the girl's purple hands. Lily froze. She stared intently at the man's back. Lily's memory began to stir. She recalled the old photograph her mother used to hide beneath her pillow. The man in the picture had deep-set eyes and a straight, upright posture. Victor was not as young as in the photo, but that presence was unmistakable. Hope flared within Lily. It was stronger than the hunger and the cold. Maya, look. Come on, Lily, they're chasing us away. No, it's Dad. Mom wasn't lying. Lily struggled free from her sister's grasp. She dashed forward. Marco was startled and tried to grab Lily, but she was too fast. Lily darted past the manager's arm. She ran straight into the restaurant's grand lobby. Victor was handing his coat to the maitre d'. He didn't hear the running behind him. Lily lunged forward. She wrapped her arms tightly around Victor's leg. Her small hands clung to the expensive wool fabric. Victor Hawthorne stopped short. He looked down. A grubby child was hugging his leg. Victor frowned. He had never allowed anyone to touch him so abruptly. The surrounding diners stopped eating. They put down their silverware. The entire restaurant descended into an eerie silence. Lily looked up, her smudged face alight with joy. Dad, you're finally back. Lily's shout echoed throughout the Il Sogno lobby. It shattered the false elegance of the place. Victor stood frozen. He looked down into the child's eyes. Maya stood at the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Marco's face drained of color, terrified for his career. Victor felt a jolt run down his spine. Daddy, we've been waiting for you for so long. That's our dad, Lily cried out again. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving white streaks on her dust-covered face. Victor Hawthorne remained motionless, like a statue, amidst the curious gazes of New York's elite. Half of his world was now being shaken by the call of a begging child. Lily still clung tightly to Victor's leg. Her tears soaked through the wool fabric, leaving dark patches on his expensive trouser leg. Victor looked down at the child. His face showed not a hint of compassion. He only saw the nuisance that was ruining his evening. Victor reached down, unclasped Lily's small fingers one by one. His movements were swift and brusque. "You have the wrong person." Victor stepped back. He lightly brushed off his trouser leg where Lily had touched it. The action was as if he were sweeping away a layer of dirt clinging to a designer item. The surrounding guests began to whisper. Victor glanced at the crowd and then turned to the maitre d'. "What kind of security do you run here? Why are you allowing vagrant children to come in and disturb the guests?" Marco stood nearby, his face completely pale. He was petrified that his devotion was being questioned. Marco lunged forward like a cornered animal. He seized Lily's shoulder and pulled her roughly toward the lobby door. Lily's feet slipped and she stumbled, letting out a wail. "Let go of me. I want to see Dad, Daddy." Lily's cries reverberated through the luxurious space of Il Sogno. The more panicked Marco became, the more force he used. He wanted to get rid of this child quickly before the fury of the billionaire Hawthorne erupted. Maya rushed in from behind. She slapped Marco's hand away from her sister. Maya stood in front of Lily, her eyes burning like fire. "Don't touch my sister with your filthy hands." Maya did not look at Marco. She turned facing Victor Hawthorne directly. Maya reached into her thin coat and pulled out a small parcel tightly wrapped in plastic. She held the package up high, forcing Victor to look at it. "Look closely, sir. Don't pretend you don't know anything. Your name is Victor Sterling, isn't it?" Victor Hawthorne froze. The name Victor Sterling rang out like a sharp blow to his chest. For 20 years, no one had called him by that name. He had changed his surname after leaving that wretched slum, hoping no one would know about his past. Victor reluctantly took the plastic package from Maya's hand. He unwrapped the plastic. Inside was an old Polaroid photograph. In the photo, a young man with long, romantic hair was smiling radiantly. It was him 20 years ago, before fame had turned him into an ice block. But the item beneath the photo was what truly made Victor's heart feel like it stopped. It was a silver ring tarnished with time. Victor picked up the ring, holding it close to his eyes. On the inner surface, the handcrafted carvings were clear, VS and SD. Victor Sterling loved Sarah Davies, the engagement ring from that year, the very thing he had thought Sarah had thrown into the trash after he left without a word. "Mom said you were the best person in the world. She said Dad was busy building a castle for us. My mother waited until she could no longer breathe." "Are you going to deny her too?" Maya said, her voice trembling with pent-up resentment. Victor stood motionless. The cold silver ring was chilling in his palm. Images of Sarah flooded back. Sarah with her vibrant red hair and warm smile. Sarah who had shared cheap slices of pizza with him atop an old construction site. The betrayal and greed of the past rushed back, colliding with the squalid reality before him. Marco noticed Victor's prolonged silence. He thought Victor was being insulted by Maya. Marco took a step forward, his hand raised as if to grab Maya's collar to pull her away. "That's enough, you insolent child. Where did you get this garbage? Stop. Take your hands off her now." Victor's voice rang out. Marco was paralyzed. He stood stock still, his hand suspended in the air. Victor looked at Marco with a razor-sharp gaze. The manager immediately backed away, his head bowed to the floor. Victor looked at no one else. He clenched the ring in his hand. Guilt began to tear at his mind. He looked at Maya, then at Lily, who was trembling behind her sister. This was no place to talk. The scrutinizing eyes of New York's elite felt like sharp needles pricking him. Victor spun around, signaling to his driver, who was waiting by the car door. "Open the back door." Then he reached out and took hold of Maya and Lily's wrists. It was not the tender grip of a father. It was the control of a man trying to hold on to the final fragments of his life's secret. Victor pulled the two children past Marco, past the gaping diners. He ushered Maya and Lily into the back seat of the luxurious Maybach. Victor followed immediately. The car door slammed shut. The dry, abrupt sound completely separated them from the opulent world outside. The car began to move, leaving the Il Sogno lobby in stunned silence. Inside the sealed space of the $1,000,000 car, the silence became frightening. Victor looked at the two children, then at the ring in his hand. He knew his life had taken a turn that no architectural blueprint could have predicted. "Tell me, where is Sarah?" Victor asked, his eyes looking straight into Maya's. Maya squeezed Lily's hand tightly, her eyes not flinching from the millionaire father's gaze. The car sped through the New York night, carrying a truth waiting to be uncovered. Streetlights flashed across the window, casting flickering streaks of light onto Victor's face. Inside the car, the scent of high-grade leather and luxurious wood filled the space. In contrast to the luxury was the damp, musty odor and grime radiating from the children's soiled clothes. Victor sat in the facing seat, maintaining the greatest possible distance. He crossed his arms, his eyes narrowed as if interrogating an adversary across a negotiating table. "Where did you get this photo and ring?" "My mother gave them to me. She told me to only seek you out if there were no other options." Maya squeezed Lily's shoulder. She looked directly at Victor, showing none of the fear a child should have standing before a billionaire. "My mother said you were busy building a castle. The twin towers, the skyscrapers you draw in the newspaper. She said when you finished building them, you would come back and take us to live inside." Victor felt his chest constrict. He looked out the window. The towers he built were symbols of power and money, but in Sarah's eyes they were just an excuse she used to explain his absence. She had used his fame to fuel hope for these children. "Sarah read about me in the newspapers. Mom had a whole box full of newspaper clippings about you. She said our dad was the greatest architect. Every time you inaugurated a building, she would point to it and smile. She said our castle was almost finished." Maya's innocent words were like a sharp rebuke to Victor's pride. He had lived under the world's adoration, while Sarah had lived in hopeless waiting beneath the foundations of his creations. Victor pulled out his phone. He dialed Elias Vance's number. "Elias, listen. I need information immediately about Sarah Davies. Find residence records, hospital records, everything from the past few years in New York. Hurry, I'm waiting." Victor hung up. He did not look at the two children. The silence in the car became heavy. Maya pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, the ink blurred by snowmelt. She held it out to Victor. "We lived here." Victor took the piece of paper. He looked at the address. It was a rundown district in Queens. He frowned, looking at the driver. "Cancel the route to the penthouse. Turn the car around now. Go to this address in Queens." The driver was stunned for a moment, but immediately turned the wheel. The Maybach left the dazzling neon lights of Manhattan. The car crossed the bridge connecting to Queens. Victor looked through the window. The scene changed quickly. The luxury storefronts receded, replaced by old, dilapidated rows of houses with broken streetlights casting a sickly yellow glow. The Victor Sterling of 20 years ago had lived in rooms like those. He had done everything to escape it to become Victor Hawthorne. And now his own children were trapped in the dark, past he had tried so hard to bury. The Maybach began to slow down and stopped completely in front of a dilapidated apartment building. Chunks of plaster were peeling off the mossy walls. The smell of garbage and damp air rushed into the car as soon as the driver lowered the window. Victor looked outside. This was the place Sarah had called their castle for the children. The contrast between the $1,000,000 car and the crumbling building before him made Victor reel. Maya opened the car door. She stepped out first, then turned back to lead Lily. "We're home. Do you want to go inside and see where Mom used to lie?" Victor did not answer. His legs felt like lead. He placed his hand on the door handle, preparing to step out. He knew that behind the door of that apartment building was a stark truth that no amount of money or power could compensate for. Victor took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped out, facing the darkness of Queens that now enveloped him. What devastating secret awaited Victor behind the door of the crumbling apartment? 402 Press. Follow now to step into the past and uncover the truth in the next chapter. The smell of garbage and damp air rushed into the car as soon as the driver lowered the window. Victor took a deep breath, pushing the door open to step out. This was no longer the dazzling New York Victor knew. The skyscrapers vanished. In their place were blocks of dark red, old, dilapidated brick stacked upon one another. The $1 million car was swallowed up by the narrow streets. The snow here had not been cleared. It had been trampled into a thick, dark slush mixed with trash and runoff water. The driver looked around with a worried expression. He didn't dare take his eyes off the rearview mirror. "Mr. Hawthorne, I can't find a safe place to park. I'll have to stop here temporarily. Just stay put. Don't go anywhere." Victor stepped out of the car. His handcrafted leather shoes sank deep into the black slush. Victor looked at his Armani suit. It was utterly out of place among the ruins. Local residents huddled in thin coats watched from a distance. Their eyes were full of wariness. They looked at the Maybach as if it were an object from another planet. Maya held Lily's hand tightly. She didn't pay attention to Victor's discomfort. Maya walked ahead, leading the way. She stepped decisively over puddles of standing water. Maya knew exactly where the manholes were and where the large piles of garbage lay. She deftly skirted the rusted barriers. Victor followed behind. He stumbled on the slick ground. The confidence of the architectural monarch completely vanished. "Walk carefully, sir. There's ice there." "I know." Victor looked at Maya. Her small shoulders were hunched beneath her worn coat. Lily began to slow down. Her legs were trembling from exhaustion. Lily tripped over a large stone and nearly stumbled and fell face first. Victor rushed forward. He quickly caught the girl before Maya could react. "Let me." Victor picked up Lily. For the first time, he felt the child's weight. Lily was feather-light. He felt the distinct outline of her ribs beneath the thin coat. The child was clearly malnourished. Lily rested her head on Victor's shoulder. Her breathing was faint. Victor tightened his embrace. A sharp, bitter feeling ran down his spine. They stopped in front of a red brick apartment building. Peeling wall fragments revealed the inner brickwork. There was no elevator. Victor looked up at the steep staircases. Maya didn't wait for him. She began to climb. Victor held Lily and took heavy steps up the rusty iron stairs. The dry echo of his leather shoes rang out. From the surrounding apartments, sounds of arguments drifted out. The smell of stale food mixed with the musty odor. Victor had to hold his breath to avoid being ill. Each floor was a test for his lungs. When he reached the fourth-floor landing, Victor stopped to catch his breath. The phone in his pocket vibrated. It was Elias Vance. "Mr. Hawthorne, I have the detailed report. Tell me." Sarah Davies rented apartment 402 here 3 years ago. She did not use the Sterling name. Employment records show she worked as a dishwasher at a small diner. In the evenings, she took on extra cleaning work at office buildings in Queens. Victor clenched his phone. He looked at Maya, who was waiting at the end of the hallway. When did she pass away? Exactly 4 weeks ago. Neighbors found out when they saw the 2 children crying in the hallway. She was overworked and suffered from severe pneumonia, no health insurance, no money for specialized medication. Victor hung up. He felt a bitter dryness in his throat. Sarah had done all those menial jobs to raise her children. She had washed dishes right beneath the feet of the buildings he designed. Sarah had died for lack of things Victor could buy with the loose change in his pocket. Maya led him to the end of the hall. She stopped in front of a rotting wooden door. The blue paint on the outside was almost entirely chipped off. There were deep scratch marks on the lock. These were the traces of strangers who had tried to break into the family's dwelling. The lack of safety was visible in every splinter of wood. Mom always told us to lock the door very carefully. "Dad, are we going back to Mom's house?" Dad Lily asked weakly. She still didn't know her mother was gone forever. Victor didn't know how to answer. He gently set Lily down. Victor's hands were trembling. He placed his hand on the cold doorknob. Inside the room there was complete silence. No warmth, no sound of people, only darkness waiting. Victor looked at Maya. She held out her hand, taking the old bunch of keys. "Mom said if you came back, she wanted you to be the one to open the door." Victor took the keys. He put one into the lock. The dry click of the latch echoed. Victor took a deep breath. He firmly pushed the wooden door open. The door swung inward, revealing the true living space of the woman he had abandoned 20 years ago. An old, musty scent and the coldness of desolation rushed out, enveloping Victor. He took a step inside, preparing to confront what remained of Sarah Davies' life. The light from the hallway streamed in, revealing a cold, empty room. Victor stopped short right at the threshold. His heart pounded heavily. He knew that behind this door, the life of a billionaire like him would never be intact again. "Come in, Dad. Mom is still waiting for you in there." Maya stepped past Victor, walking into the darkness. Victor reached for the light switch, but Maya stopped him. "The light is broken, Dad. Our electricity was cut off last week." Victor was numb. He stood in the gloom, his hand still gripping the rotting wooden doorknob. He stepped into the room, the door closing behind him. Darkness enveloped everything, leaving only Victor's heavy breathing in the empty room. The room was nearly empty. There was no heater. In the corner, a tattered mattress lay directly on the rotting wooden floor. Victor saw a few tattered cardboard boxes containing a few worn clothes. No television, no proper table or chairs. The most valuable items had surely vanished long ago in exchange for daily meals. "Dad, our house is so dark. I can't find my doll." "Sit down on the mattress, Lily. Wait for Dad a little bit." Victor shone his phone's flashlight onto the wall. He saw Lily's childish scribbles. The girl had used colored paper to cover the black mold patches on the wall. On the windowsill, a potted plant had long since died and dried out. The soil inside was cracked. Everything in apartment 402 reflected Sarah's desperate attempts. She had tried to create a home amidst this wreckage. Victor felt his legs tremble. The expensive leather soles of his shoes echoed dryly on the creaking wooden floor. Victor walked to the corner of the room where a cheap particle board desk stood. This was the only piece of furniture left. On the desktop, a stack of soiled papers lay scattered. Victor picked up the top sheet. It was an electricity bill that was 2 months overdue. The next was a rent past due notice. But what seized Victor's heart the most was the stack of prescription receipts. $30. $45. Small numbers to Victor, but stamped in red with the word unpaid. To him, this amount wouldn't cover one bottle of wine at his lunch. But to Sarah, it was the barrier between life and death. She had saved every coin, but still couldn't afford the rounds of antibiotics. Mom used to sit here and write something in the evenings. She said she was writing a letter to Dad, but didn't know where to send it. Maya pointed to a worn, leather-bound notebook lying beneath the stack of bills. Victor tremblingly picked up the diary. He flipped to the last pages. Sarah's handwriting was no longer neat. It was shaky and uneven. December 14th. The chest pain is back. I have to skip dinner so Maya and Lily can have a little more soup. I'm not afraid of passing away. I just worry that if I leave too soon, who will take the children to see Victor? He must be very busy. His castle must be very high up so he can't see us down here. Victor closed his eyes. A single hot tear rolled down onto the blurred page. Sarah did not resent him. She did not curse his betrayal. She only blamed herself. Blamed herself for not having enough money for medicine. Blamed herself for not being able to wait longer. Did she talk about you often? She told me about Victor Sterling. She said he had the most beautiful smile in the world. But in the photo she kept, he wasn't wearing a suit like you. Victor turned to look at the wall opposite the mattress. There was a rectangular empty space. The wallpaper there was lighter than the surrounding area. It indicated that something had been hanging there for a long time. What used to hang here? Maya. That was Mom's most valuable possession. The portrait Mom painted of you when she was in England. She said every time she looked at it, she felt she had more strength to go and wash dishes for hire. So where is it now? She sold it last week. She carried Lily and walked all the way to Brooklyn to meet an old junk dealer. Mom cried a lot. She said she had to sell her last memory to buy antibiotics. But the money still wasn't enough. She could only buy 1 dose. She saved it for Lily because Lily was coughing too. Victor clenched the diary tightly. His knuckles were white. His chest felt crushed by a block of steel. Sarah had sold his very face, sold the last bit of remaining love to save her child. Meanwhile, he had sat in the luxurious Il Sogno restaurant mocking the impoverished. What was the owner's name? Where was that place? I don't remember the name. I only remember it was near the train tracks in Brooklyn. Mom left the address in the prescription clip. Victor frantically rummaged through the stack of papers. He found a small slip of paper that read, Silas's Shop, Brooklyn. Next to it was a sheet with the name of a community clinic right near their building. The name of Sarah's treating physician was at the bottom of the page. Victor felt he needed to do something immediately. He couldn't sit still in this room full of ghosts any longer. Half of the truth about Sarah's passing was still unclear. Why didn't she contact his office? Why did she accept passing away in silence? Victor knew the doctor at the clinic would have the answer. Maya, take Lily. We're going now. Going where, Dad? I'm so hungry. I'm taking you two to eat. But before that, I need to meet someone. Victor scooped up the stack of prescription receipts from the table. He tucked Sarah's diary into his coat pocket right near his heart. He picked up Lily. She had fallen asleep from exhaustion. Victor rushed out of apartment 402 with urgent speed. Maya ran after him, her eyes filled with surprise at the sudden change in this cold man. Victor didn't wait for the driver to open the door. He pushed open the Maybach's door himself. Go to the community clinic at the end of the road. Quickly, the car sped off, leaving the dilapidated apartment building in the night. Victor looked at the prescription receipt in his hand. He needed one final medical confirmation. He wanted to know exactly how much pain Sarah was in before she closed her eyes. Victor Hawthorne was searching for the truth, but he didn't know that the truth would be even more cruel than anything he could imagine. Mr. Hawthorne, someone has been following us since we left the apartment building. The driver's voice came from the front seat. Victor was startled and looked into the rearview mirror. An old black truck was tailing them closely. Its headlights shone straight into the Maybach's window in a challenging manner. Ignore them. Just get to the clinic. Victor squeezed Maya's hand. He sensed a danger lurking, but the regret in his heart was even greater than the fear. The truth about Sarah Davies was not only at the clinic, it was also linked to someone who didn't want him to touch the past. The car stopped abruptly in front of the clinic entrance. Victor stepped out, but before he could enter, the black truck blocked the road. The truck door opened. A man stepped out holding an object that made Victor freeze. Mr. Hawthorne, I think you should see this before you meet the doctor. Victor snatched the envelope from the hand of the stranger standing in front of the truck. He didn't get a good look at the man's face. Victor's mind only had room for the stack of soiled prescription receipts in his pocket. He turned his back, rushing straight toward the clinic's frosted glass door. Maya led Lily and ran behind him. Victor's leather shoes pounded on the old tiled floor. Inside the clinic was a scene of chaos, the strong antiseptic smell mixed with the odor of damp clothing. The plastic chairs were packed with people. The sound of children crying rang out continuously. Poor laborers sat huddled, their tired eyes staring blankly. Victor stood there in his rumpled Armani suit. He was out of place, like a king lost in a junkyard. Victor did not look at the waiting number board. He walked straight to the reception desk with heavy steps. A young nurse looked up. She looked at Victor's expensive suit with a wary expression. You have to take a number and wait your turn. I don't have time to wait. I want to see the doctor who signed this stack of bills. Victor placed Sarah's papers on the counter. The nurse maintained her firm attitude. Everyone here has to wait. You don't have special privileges. Victor said nothing more. He pulled out his wallet, taking out a thick wad of cash. He slammed the money down on the desk right in front of the nurse. The crisp new bills lay motionless on the scratched counter surface. I need to see him. Right now. I will pay for everyone waiting here if you move quickly. The urgency in Victor's eyes made the nurse shudder. She looked at the money, then at Victor's flushed face. She said nothing, just took the stack of bills and hurried inside. The people waiting began to whisper. Maya squeezed Lily's hand, clinging close to Victor. 5 minutes later, a middle-aged man walked out. He wore a white lab coat that had yellowed with age. His eyes were dark and tired. His gaze swept across the waiting room and stopped at Maya. Maya, what are you doing back here, Dr. Miller? I'm with him. Dr. Miller looked over at Victor. His eyes immediately changed. He looked at the Patek Philippe watch on Victor's wrist, then at the black mud-stained shoes. A bitter smile appeared on the doctor's lips. So it's you, the hero who shows up after the memorial service. I want to know what happened. Please come into the office. I don't want to disturb my patients with your story. Victor stepped into the cramped office. The smell of old paper and damp air filled the space. Dr. Miller closed the door and tossed a file of medical records onto the desk. Victor sat down on the wooden chair. His hands were clasped tightly. Sarah Davies. She arrived here with her lungs completely ravaged. Dr. Miller opened the file, pointing to the diagnosis written in red ink. Acute pneumonia, respiratory failure complications. She worked 12 hours a day in buildings without heat. She came home at night to sleep in a damp room on the 4th floor. Human lungs are not made of iron. Why didn't you use stronger medication? Why didn't you admit her to a large hospital? Are you asking me? She had no insurance. She had no money for the hospital deposit. She came here with nothing but debt. Dr. Miller stood up. He walked over to Victor, his eyes full of contempt. Do you know what she said when I told her she needed hospitalization? She said, "Doctor, I have 2 children. I need to buy them bread. The medication can wait." Victor felt his heart being squeezed. He looked at the file. The cold numbers exposed the truth. How much money did she need to survive? Dr. Miller laughed loudly. His laughter was harsh and dry in the small room. $500. A course of high-dose antibiotics and a week on a ventilator. $500 was the price for her not to pass away on that tattered mattress. $500. The number rang in Victor's head like an explosion. Only $500. It was less than the bottle of wine he had drunk that evening at Il Sogno. It was a fraction of the money he tipped waitstaff every week. Victor looked down at his hands. The fingers that once sketched billion-dollar tower blueprints now trembled uncontrollably. Just for $500, she died. To men of your caliber, that's nothing. To Sarah, that was life. She sold everything she could. She skipped meals to save money for Lily's cough syrup. She passed away from exhaustion, hunger, and cold. Your absence was the thing that ultimately cost her her life. Victor couldn't stand steadily. He braced his hands on the desk. His wealth suddenly felt ludicrous. He had everything, yet he allowed the woman he loved to pass away for a sum he could have thrown out the window without a second thought. He didn't hurt Sarah with a specific action. He hurt her with 20 years of indifference. Dad! Was Mom in a lot of pain? Dad, Maya's voice came from the doorway. She had heard everything. Victor raised his head. He saw tears streaming down his daughter's worn face. Lily was still asleep on her sister's shoulder, completely unaware that her father was being indicted by a poor doctor. I'm a terrible man. At least you know who you are. But Sarah never said that. Even near her last moments, she still held your photo and told Maya that Dad was building a castle. She loved you with blind faith, and you repaid her with this moral decay. Victor clenched his fists. A desperate resolve surged from the wreckage of his conscience. He couldn't bring Sarah back, but he would not let any of her memory be buried anymore. Thank you, Doctor. The money at the counter is for this clinic. Buy the best ventilator for the people here. Victor turned to Maya. His voice was husky, but as decisive as a command. Take me to the junk dealer's place in Brooklyn, right now. But Lily is sleeping, and it's still dark, Dad. We can't wait until morning. I have to get that painting back. It's the only thing Mom left behind. I can't lose it for another minute. Victor rushed out of the clinic. He quickly picked up Lily from Maya's arms. He ran toward the idling Maybach. Snow began to fall harder. The wind blew fiercely against his face, but Victor did not feel the cold. He only felt a fire raging inside. Thank you for accompanying Victor and his daughters to this heartbreaking moment. Will Victor retrieve Sarah's soul memento in time? Don't Go. The dramatic journey of atonement in Brooklyn will continue in the next chapter. Leave a heart if you believe in the miracle of family bonds. Victor rushed out of the clinic like a man deranged. He pushed Maya and Lily into the back seat of the Maybach. The black truck from earlier had vanished into the snow, but Victor no longer had the presence of mind to care. He pounded his hand on the driver's seat, urging him on. To Brooklyn. Right now. Drive as fast as you can. The car sped off, weaving through the narrow streets of Queens toward the bridge. Victor pulled out his phone and dialed Elias. Elias, listen. Grab $50,000 in cash. Get to the address I'm sending you in Brooklyn immediately. Don't ask any questions. Just bring the money there. If I haven't arrived yet, you must wait at the door. Don't let the shop owner close up. Victor hung up. He looked out the window, the streetlights blurring from the speed. Victor did not care about traffic laws. Only the image of Sarah's painting flashed in Victor's mind. He considered it the most urgent task of his life. It was not just a painting, it was the honor, the soul of the woman he had abandoned. The Maybach slammed on the brakes in front of a row of dilapidated warehouses next to the train tracks in Brooklyn. Victor jumped out of the car before it had fully stopped. Before him was a small shop, its glass hazy with grime. A wooden sign hung loosely bearing the words, "Silas's Finds." Inside, an old man was busy tidying up goods. Victor rushed forward, using his arm to block the rolling door that was halfway down. "Wait. Don't close." The old man. Silas looked up. His face was as wrinkled as the old tree bark. He looked at Victor's flustered, disheveled appearance, which still reeked of money, with suspicion. "We're closed. Come back tomorrow, my rich friend. I need to retrieve a painting. A woman sold it here last week, a portrait of a gentleman." Victor was out of breath. He squeezed himself into the cramped space, which was filled with the smell of dampness and dust. His eyes scanned the towering piles of old junk. Finally, Victor stopped short. On a high shelf next to a stack of old books was a framed painting wrapped loosely in old newspaper. "That's it? I want to buy it back. Right now." Silas sauntered over. He crossed his arms and looked Victor up and down. "That's not for sale. Someone put a deposit on it. I'll pay double, 10 times. How much do you want? Listen, friend, we operate by rules here. A man put down a $50 deposit this morning. He's coming to pick it up tomorrow morning. I promised to keep it for him, so it's his." Victor felt a rush of blood to his head. He had never been refused, especially when he had the money. He straightened up, trying to regain the demeanor of a powerful billionaire. "Do you know who I am? I am Victor Hawthorne. I could buy this entire street, let alone this wretched shop of yours. Give me the painting and you'll have enough money to retire." Silas scoffed. He spat onto the dusty floor. "Hawthorne. That name sounds important, but here in Brooklyn it's worthless. You can buy the whole street, but you can't buy my word. I detest the way men in suits like you use money to push people around. Now get out before I call the police for trespassing." Victor stood frozen. He looked at the painting on the shelf only a few steps away, yet seemingly miles out of reach. Helplessness tore at Victor's mind. Maya walked into the shop leading Lily. She looked around the dusty room and then at the corner of the tarnished wooden counter. Maya walked toward Silas, her voice small but clear. "Do you remember me? I'm the girl who came here with my mother last week." Silas squinted at Maya. His gaze softened a little. "Ah, the girl with the red-haired mother. My mother stood right here. My mother cried when she handed you the painting. My mother said it was the last thing she could sell to buy medicine for my sister. My mother begged you for an extra $5 because the medicine price had gone up." Victor shuddered. He looked at the spot Maya was pointing to. He imagined Sarah, the woman he once cherished, having to stand amidst this junk, haggling over pennies in humiliation. "My mother said this painting was her whole life. She sold it because she loved us more than her life. Now Mom is gone. I just want my dad to see it one time." Silas was silent. He looked at Victor, then at the two grubby children. Victor felt a choke in his throat. His arrogance vanished completely. He lowered his voice, shedding his superior air. "Please, Silas, I didn't come here to buy an antique. I came to reclaim my wife. I abandoned her 20 years ago. I'm the most terrible man on earth. That painting is the only thing I have left to say I'm sorry." Silas still shook his head. He grabbed his cane, intending to pull the rolling door all the way down. "A rule is a rule, my friend. I don't want trouble with the man who put down the deposit." Victor acted on instinct. He didn't mention money again. Victor reached up to his left wrist and forcefully removed his Patek Philippe watch. It was a limited edition worth as much as a luxury apartment in Manhattan. He held it out to Silas. Victor's eyes burned with a frantic, painful resolve. Victor Sterling loved Sarah Davies. The inscription in the cold silver ring felt like it was tearing at Victor's skin. He looked into Silas's eyes. Those old eyes did not gleam at the sight of wealth. Victor placed the Patek Philippe watch down on the dusty wooden counter. He pulled out his leather wallet, emptying all the cash inside onto the table. "All of this is yours. The watch, this money, and the car outside if you want it, in exchange for that painting, please." Silas looked at the watch. The sapphire crystal reflected the dim yellowish light of the antique shop. He looked at the scattered stack of $100 bills. Silas looked up at Victor's face. He saw a man who was utterly broken. This was not a transaction. This was a plea. The value of the watch could buy thousands of such paintings. Silas remained motionless. He did not touch the money. He was weighing his promise to the customer who had placed the deposit. Lily, who had been clinging behind Maya, now stepped forward. She saw the newspaper-wrapped painting on the table. Lily walked up, her small hands gripping the edge of the wooden counter. Lily burst into tears. Tears streamed down her grimy cheeks. "Sir, please let my dad take his picture back. My mom spent a long time drawing it. Every night she would talk to this picture when she missed Dad. She said Dad was building a castle so he couldn't come home. My mom spent her whole life keeping it safe. She only sold it because I was sick." Lily's crying echoed in the cramped space of Silas's shop. It passed through the crevices of the old junk, finding its way into old Silas's hardened heart. Maya also stepped forward. She took her sister's hand, her eyes red but resolute as she looked at Silas. Silas sighed. He used his frail hand to push the watch toward Victor. He only picked up the stack of cash from the wallet. "Take the watch. I don't need an apartment on my wrist. I'll only take this money to reimburse that customer's deposit and compensate him for the broken promise." Silas pushed the painting toward Maya. He turned his back, knocking his cane on the floor. "Take it and get out of here before I change my mind. Don't let the little one cry anymore." Victor took the painting from Maya. His hands were trembling. He carefully tore away the outer layer of old newspaper. The paper ripped away. A face gradually appeared under the dim light. Victor Sterling materialized. The young man in the painting had slightly long hair and eyes bright with faith. He was smiling. It was the smile of a man who loved and was loved. Sarah had painted this with all the devotion she held for him. Every meticulous brushstroke detailed his eyes, his nose, and even the small scar above Victor's eyebrow. Sarah had kept his face etched in her memory for 20 years. She had entrusted all her memories to this canvas. Victor looked into the eyes of his painted self. Those eyes were filled with love. They were completely different from the cold eyes of Victor Hawthorne he saw in the mirror every morning. Victor Hawthorne had built towers, but he had lost the man in this painting. Victor's final bit of composure vanished. His legs sank to the dusty floor. Victor Sterling, the powerful billionaire architect, now collapsed in the middle of a Brooklyn junk shop. He clutched the painting to his chest. Choked sobs escaped his throat. Victor wept uncontrollably. He no longer cared about his expensive suit or the image of the architectural monarch. The ice that had encased his heart for 20 years shattered completely. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm a terrible man. I abandoned you and the children." His sobs echoed among the abandoned junk. Silas stood in the dark corner, pretending to wipe down an oil lamp so he wouldn't have to look at the heartbreaking scene. Maya and Lily stood silently. This was the first time they had seen this cold man show such weakness. Lily stepped closer, wrapping her small arms around Victor's neck. Maya also knelt beside him. She placed her hand on her father's trembling shoulder. The three of them embraced amidst Silas's antique shop. The smell of dust, melted snow, and sweat mingled together. The connection of blood surged powerfully. They were no longer strangers. They were a family who had just found each other in the wreckage of the past. Victor held the two children tightly. He felt the warmth from Maya and Lily's thin bodies. He realized this was the most important structure he needed to protect. Not the skyscrapers, but these two small lives. A long moment later, Victor stopped crying. He stood up. He used the hem of his overcoat to wipe away the tear streaks on his face. Victor did not straighten his rumpled clothes. He carefully wrapped the painting in the lining of his overcoat. He picked up Lily. She had fallen asleep. He tightly held Maya's hand. "Let's go, children. I'm taking you home." "Are we going back to your castle, Dad?" "No, Lily. We're going to where we truly belong. But before that, I have something I must do." Victor stepped out of Silas's shop. The snow was still falling, but the air seemed less cold. He walked straight to the Maybach. The driver hurried to open the door, astonished at his boss's ravaged appearance. Victor did not sit far from the children anymore. He let Lily sit on his lap. Maya rested her head on his shoulder. Victor looked at his reflection in the car window. A smudged face, messy hair, and red bloodshot eyes. He looked no different from a vagrant who had just emerged from a street skirmish. "Mr. Hawthorne, should we go to the villa?" Victor was silent for a moment. He looked at Sarah's painting resting on his lap. The dawn was beginning to break over the Manhattan skyline. The skyscrapers emerged in the hazy mist. No. Go to the headquarters of Hawthorne Innovations. But sir, it's still early, and you need to rest. I said go to the headquarters immediately. I cannot wait another minute. The Maybach sped toward Manhattan. Victor looked at the towering buildings rushing past. He knew he was about to do something that would shock all of New York. Victor Sterling was returning, and he would use those cold bricks and mortar to repay the love he had lost. The car stopped in front of the Hawthorne Tower just as the sky was brightening. Victor stepped out of the car looking like a defeated man, but his eyes burned with a furious resolve. He led the two ragged children and strode confidently into the lobby of the city's most prestigious building. The security guards and night shift employees stared open-mouthed. They could not believe their eyes. Their architectural monarch was leading two grubby children into the executive elevator. Victor pressed the top floor button. He knew that behind the door of that office a new battle was about to begin. He would tear down the monument he had built for so long to reconstruct a real home. Maya Lilly. Today I will show you our true castle. The elevator door closed. Victor looked at his reflection in the mirror. He was no longer Victor Hawthorne. He was Victor Sterling, and he was reclaiming his own soul. The truth about Sarah and the contract of the heart were about to be announced to the world. His life would never be the same. Half of his world was about to crumble to make way for a new wonder. 8 a.m. The Hawthorne Tower was at its busiest rhythm. Employees in neat suits and receptionists with standard smiles all froze. They saw the chairman, who always appeared in his most perfect attire, now looking no different from a vagrant who had just emerged from a street skirmish. Victor's face was covered in stubble. His eyes were red from a sleepless night. His clothes were rumpled and smelled musty. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," the young receptionist stammered. Victor did not stop. He did not nod a greeting as usual. He walked straight toward the private executive elevator. Two security guards were about to approach, thinking he was an intruder, but they halted when they recognized Victor's steely eyes. "Is Elias in the meeting room?" Victor asked without looking at the person in front of him. The security guard only managed a mechanical nod. They are waiting for you on the 50th floor. Victor stepped into the elevator. Maya clung close to him, seeing the gleaming glass walls and the breathtaking luxury of the tower. Lily looked up at the rapidly changing numbers on the digital display. "Dad, is this your castle?" "No, Lily. This is just a block of concrete. We are here to dismantle it." The door to the 50th floor opened. Inside the boardroom, 12 of the largest shareholders of the corporation sat around the long walnut table. In the center of the table was a high-end plastic architectural model of the Skyline Tower project, Victor's upcoming pride and joy. A commercial tower that would break all height records. Elias Vance was standing adjusting the projector, his expression tense. The door burst open. Victor, leading the two children, walked in. The murmuring in the boardroom fell silent. Mr. Henderson, the eldest shareholder, jumped up, his eyes wide as he looked at Victor's appearance. "Victor, what the devil is this? Do you know we have an important presentation with the Japanese partners in 15 minutes, and who are these children?" Victor did not answer. He walked to the head of the table. He placed Sarah's newspaper-wrapped painting on top of the expensive Skyline Tower model. The rustling of the paper sounded out of place in the money-scented room. Victor looked directly at Elias. Elias stopped the Skyline presentation. "I have something else to project. But sir, we have poured hundreds of millions of dollars into this. Turn it off immediately." Victor picked up the technical blueprints for the Skyline project on the table. Under the stunned gaze of the board of directors, he tore it to shreds with both hands. The sound of ripping paper was dry and harsh. Victor tossed the fragments into the trash can next to him. "The Skyline Tower project is canceled, as of this moment." "You're crazy, Victor." "Are you throwing money out the window?" Henderson shouted, his face red with anger. Victor turned around, looking straight at the man who had just yelled at him. He placed his hands on Maya and Lily's shoulders. "You call this investment. I call it vanity. We build glass boxes to house soulless people, while out there people pass away because they don't have a warm roof over their heads. Sarah passed away for lack of $500 for medicine. She passed away in a room where the wind blew through every strand of hair. Victor signaled to Elias. Elias, despite his trembling hands, quickly opened the file Victor had requested he prepare in the car. Another blueprint appeared on the large screen. It was not a skyscraper. It was a low-rise complex with many sun-facing windows, common green spaces, and art rooms. The corporation's new project is called Our Haven. We will build this housing complex in Queens and Brooklyn. It is for freelance artists, the poor laborers who are being abandoned by this city. There will be a free health center on the ground floor. There will be a place for children like Lily to play without fear of being chased away. Are you planning to do charity work with our money? This is a business corporation, not the Red Cross. Another shareholder slammed his hand on the table. Victor gave a faint smile. He pulled Maya and Lily forward, standing opposite all the suit-clad people reeking of money in the room. Allow me to introduce you. This is Maya and Lily Hawthorne, my daughters. I abandoned them for 20 years to sit here calculating with you all how to build columns higher than the competition. But Sarah, their mother, taught me a lesson that business schools never teach. She taught me that the most solid foundation is not made of cement, but built on a promise. Victor looked at Maya. Her eyes were full of pride, but also pain. From today, my two daughters are the most important stakeholders in my life. Every decision I make from now on will not be based on growth charts, but on whether Sarah would smile at what we are doing. Elias approached Victor, his voice anxious. What about the managements or partners will withdraw capital if you do not directly manage? Victor unpinned the chairman name tag from his jacket pocket, placing it on the table. Elias, you have worked with me for 15 years. You are the only one here who understands how much I had become an ice block. I appoint you as acting CEO. You will manage the current business segments to finance the Our Haven project. I am stepping down from direct management. The boardroom was in turmoil. Arguments and phone calls rang out continuously. Victor did not care. He picked up Sarah's painting. He bent down and lifted Lily onto his shoulder. Dad, where are we going now? We are going home, Lily. A real home. Victor led Maya out of the boardroom. He left behind the shouts about profit stock and soulless skyscrapers. He walked past the curious employees standing in the hallway. Victor stepped into the elevator, a feeling of relief spreading through his body. For the first time in 20 years, he no longer saw himself as the powerful Victor Hawthorne. He saw himself as Victor Sterling, the man who had just found his soul in the eyes of his two daughters. Next week I will take you two to visit your mother. We will bring this painting for her to see. Maya squeezed Victor's hand. Will Mom like your new castle? She will, because this time I built it with my heart, Maya. The elevator door slammed shut. The last image the people in the Hawthorne Tower saw was the back of a man stained with mud, leading two grubby children leaving an empire to search for his own home. The elevator bell rang a long signal announcing an end and also a completely new beginning. Victor looked at his reflection in the elevator mirror. He saw himself smiling. A genuine smile, exactly like the young man in Sarah's painting. The real battle to become a father had just begun, and he was ready to pay any price for the contract of his heart. The elevator reached the ground floor. Victor stepped out into the lobby where the snowstorm was still raging. But this time, he didn't feel cold. He held his two children tight, stepping into the white snow, preparing for the most difficult yet happiest journey of his life. Half of the story of billionaire Victor Hawthorne had ended, yielding to the first chapter of the father, Victor Sterling. The old black taxi stopped at the edge of the woods. Victor stepped out of the car. This time he didn't need his private driver to open the door. He carried the luggage himself. A cool breeze swept past, carrying the smell of wild grass and damp earth of the English countryside. There was no aggressive honking of Manhattan cars. There was no choking smell of exhaust fumes. Here, there was only the silence of green fields stretching to the horizon. Maya led Lily out after him. The two girls wore simple cream-colored wool dresses. Their faces were rosier than they had been a month ago. Maya's eyes no longer carried the constant look of wariness. Lily was busy chasing a yellow butterfly that had just flown past. Victor looked around. This small town was where Sarah was born. This was also the place he had once promised to return to take her away. Victor took a deep breath. His chest no longer felt constricted as it had when he stood on the 50th floor of the Hawthorne Tower. He felt like he was truly breathing. Dad, there's no honking here, is there? No, just the sound of the wind and the birds. Lily. Mom liked it here very much, didn't she, Dad? Mom liked peaceful places like this because her heart was always warm. The three of them began to walk along the stone-paved path leading to the town cemetery. Victor walked slowly. He was no longer rushing like on mornings racing against the stock market. He wanted to feel every step on this land. The cemetery was situated on a small hill surrounded by gray wooden fences and old oak trees. They stopped in front of a fresh grave. It was built with pristine white stone, simple yet incredibly dignified. There were no elaborate angel statues or ostentatious marble columns. Victor placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, Sarah's favorite flower, on the gravestone. He knelt down gently, touching the carved lines on the stone with his hand. Sarah Davies, the keeper of the flame. Even so, I love you. Those were the last lines in the diary Victor had read and reread hundreds of times. Each time he read it, his heart ached, but now it brought a strange comfort. Sarah had forgiven him even before he knew he needed to be forgiven. She held no resentment. She only held love to serve as a fire to warm her two children during the cold days in Queens. Sarah, I'm home, Victor whispered. His voice was no longer hoarse with pain as it had been at Silas's shop. It carried sincerity and relief. I brought the painting back. I brought the children home. I'm sorry I made you wait so long. From now on, I will never let the flame you left behind be extinguished. I promise. Maya stood beside him, placing her hand on her father's shoulder. For the first time, Maya no longer felt the burden of a sister having to do the mother's part. She leaned her head against Victor's arm. Mom, Dad built a different castle. It's not made of glass, Mom. It's beautiful. Lily knelt down beside Victor, gently kissing the cold white gravestone. Sleep well, Mom. Dad said we will stay nearby with you. Victor stood up. He felt the burden of guilt that had been crushing his shoulders for the past month had truly vanished. Sarah had lifted it for him with her eternal forgiveness. He held his children's hands tightly, turning his back on the grave, but his soul remained there, connected to Sarah in a way that passing away could not sever. They walked for 10 more minutes to a large plot of land not far from the cemetery. It was a gentle slope overlooking the valley. The steady sound of excavators echoed from a distance. A few workers were busy measuring. Victor pulled an old rumpled yellowed blueprint from his coat pocket. It was the original Our Haven sketch. The blueprint that Victor Sterling and Sarah Davies had drawn together on a piece of paper torn from a student notebook 20 years ago. In that drawing, the house did not have towering steel structures. It had many windows to welcome the sunlight. To the east was a spacious art room with a high ceiling reserved specifically for Sarah. In the center of the house was a small library with a stone fireplace where Victor had dreamed of reading books to his children. Are you going to build it exactly like this? Maya looked at the blueprint, then at the foundation stakes being driven into the ground. That's right. Every window, every brick. I've kept this blueprint in my heart for too long. It's time to bring it to life. Victor spread the blueprint on a flat stone. He pointed to the room facing the flower garden. This will be Maya's drawing room. You can draw anything you want. And this, the small room next to the library, is for Lily. Lily ran around the foundation trenches being dug. She jumped over a small pile of dirt and ran back to Victor. Lily looked at the working builders, then recalled the Hawthorne Tower house in her memory. She looked up at her father, her large eyes filled with curiosity. Dad, is this the most beautiful building in the world? It's not as tall as the castle in New York is. Lily's question made Victor pause. He remembered his promise 10 years ago about the great skyscrapers. The Victor Sterling of the past had confused greatness with mere spectacle. He had thought that the height of a building measured his success. Victor slowly knelt down. He didn't care that his expensive clothes were getting muddy. He looked straight into Lily's eyes, then took Maya's hand and pulled her closer. Lily, listen to me. The most beautiful building in the world isn't about how many floors it has or how much money it cost to build. Victor pointed to his heart, then to his two daughters. It is built with things that no excavator can dig up. It's built with your mother Sarah's love for you. It's built with Maya's courage in protecting her sister. And it's built with Dad's promise. Victor looked toward the house gradually taking shape on the ground. Concrete and glass can shatter. The tallest towers can fall. But a foundation built on love will stand forever. This is the greatest masterpiece of my life, Lily. Because in this house, we have each other. Maya smiled. For the first time, she truly believed that she was no longer alone in fighting the world. Victor stood up holding his children's hands and walked along the hillside as the evening sunlight began to fade. On the horizon, the fiery red sun was setting behind the trees, casting a golden glow over everything. The shadows of the three stretched long across the green grass. Victor no longer looked toward bustling New York. He no longer calculated billion-dollar contracts or soulless growth charts. In Victor's coat pocket, the most important contract of his life still lay there. It was the contract of the heart, a contract with no expiration date, no penalty clauses for breach, only one single commitment to protect the flame that Sarah had left behind. Elias Vance had called him that morning announcing that the Our Haven project in Queens had begun receiving its first artists. Victor smiled at the thought. He was not just building a house for himself, he was beginning to rebuild the world in the way Sarah had always wished. "Dad, look, the sun is going to sleep in our garden," Lily exclaimed, pointing toward the setting sun. "Yes, and tomorrow it will wake up again right at your window." Victor Hawthorne, or rather Victor Sterling, tightly held his two children's hands. He walked on the small dirt road, leaving behind the pain, the hunger, and the dark rooms in Queens. Ahead of him was a new home, a new life, where love was the only building material and the most solid foundation. The three figures gradually disappeared beyond the hillside, blending into the yellow of the setting sun. New York was still reeling among the glass towers, but here in the stillness of the English countryside, a heart had truly found its way home. The contract of the heart had been fulfilled, the promise had been kept, and the flame of love would burn brightly forever in the house Victor built with his entire soul. The story of the two grubby girls and the millionaire father does not end with wealth. It ends with peace, because ultimately the most beautiful house in the world is the place where the people who love us are waiting. Victor Hawthorne's journey is an awakening to the true value of human life. He spent half his life building skyscrapers, but he failed miserably at building a home. The greatest philosophy drawn from the story is, the most solid foundation is not made of reinforced concrete, but built on love and promises. Victor's wealth became ludicrous and cruel when juxtaposed with Sarah's passing, a woman who left this life only for lack of an amount equivalent to one of his lavish lunches. Through this, we realize that success is not measured by the height of a structure or the number in a bank account, but by the warmth of the hand we hold of a loved one. Victor teaches us the lesson of presence. Money can buy convenience, but it cannot buy back lost time or forgiveness from the departed. Ultimately, the highest peak a person can reach is not the summit of lonely glory, but the peace found in fully executing the contract of the heart, living responsibly, knowing when to acknowledge the importance of family, and empathizing with the unseen lives around them. Note: the above story is entirely fictional. Character names, locations, and events were created for the purpose of illustrating an educational and artistic message. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.